This is our presentation of Call to Action. In this presentation today, we'll introduce you to the artists and our young artists involved in the programme. We'll introduce the concepts and the origins of the living newspaper. We'll explore censorship and its poignancy within our project. We'll explore our 2 editions of Call to Action, our forthcoming 3rd edition, and our Call to Action to you, our teacher edition. And there'll be space for questions at the end. And at any point, if you do have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and either we'll get a chance to answer them as we go, or we'll try and address them at the end. So to begin with our introductions, my name is Clara Bloomfield. I am an award-winning freelance international theatre maker, director, lecturer, and socially engaged artist from Scotland. I specialise in creating socially politically engaged performance and learning experiences in a range of contexts and settings. My work lies at the intersection of theatre and society. Immediate and responsive in nature, I explore the stories of the everyday and present work both in theatres and non-traditional spaces as a catalyst for social change. I have a particular interest in creating work for, by and with young people, verbatim theatre and theatre and health. I'm a recognised Fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts and the Arts for Good Fellow for the Singapore International Foundation for my commitment to creating performance for social change. And that is very much at the heart of this project. Can I introduce you to my colleague, Kai?
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Kai. I'm the company manager of ITAC Collaborative. We're an ethnic minority company that produces social political theatre plays in Singapore. As an arts manager, I specialize in theatre productions, and I've had almost a decade of experience with various companies and organizations in Singapore, managing plays, theatre productions mainly. Besides managing theatre productions, I have a vested interest in developing programs and theatre productions for youth and young audiences, as I see the importance of investing the next young generation towards sustaining and evolving our arts industry. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to my young artist from Singapore, Shadi, to introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name is Yoshad. People know me as Shadi. I'm a theatre maker and actor. I'm in school for acting right now from Singapore. I have a special interest in education and socially engaged works, and I believe that art is education when done right. And I am happy to say that my career in theatre so far has aligned itself with that belief, especially when I get to work with theatre companies such as ITAC Collaborative. And I'll pass the time to Catherine Starr.
Hi guys, I'm Catherine Starr Blatchford. I'm a training actress at Edinburgh College. This is my 2nd year, and I'm also an aspiring lecturer, which is why I was incredibly excited to take part today. My interests are political and biographical theatre. I love being able to help people have a voice on stage and to spread awareness to problems. And yeah, that is me.
Thank you very much, everyone. So, to take you back to the beginning, it feels like a rather epic start to our story. In 2009, I travelled to Singapore to be part of the International Fellowship for the Singapore Foundation, SIF, where I met a woman called Shaza. And through this project, we instantly connected for our love for creating projects that address social justice and racial inequalities. After that fellowship ended, there was an opportunity as part of being a fellow to apply for a pot of money. And this was at the height of COVID, and it had to be a digital project. And I had the idea of looking at an old form of theatre called the living newspaper, which we're going to describe very shortly, as a process whereby Shaz and I could connect online with young people to explore the hegemonic structures that exist within our society of being a young person and find ways to dismantle that whilst looking at racial injustice. I'm going to hand you over now to Kai.
So when Clara first introduced the project with me, she introduced me to the term called the living newspaper, and I was really interested in it. So I did my own research about it and found a few interesting facts about the living newspaper. So it started out as a theatrical genre that began during the Russian War, and primarily what it was used to convey articles and propaganda, and it was performed to illiterate Russians so that they would be aware of the news as well. But because news had to be spread fast and wide during those times, oftentimes living newspaper kits during the Russian times were fuss-free and they used basic props, simple costumes, limited or no set, so that it was highly portable and it could travel really easily. The genre was then revolutionized in the 1930s by an American company called the Federal Theatre Projects that borrowed ideas from the original Russian genre. However, instead of presenting propaganda or actual news articles, they presented on social issues. The first ever living newspaper by the Federal Theatre Projects was called Ethiopia, and it was about the invasion of Ethiopia by Italy, but it never saw the light of day because it was issued a censorship ban by the federal government as it was impersonating official heads like Mussolini. So while researching on this idea or this fact that it was censored by the government at that time resonated with me deeply because it was very similar to our situation in present-day Singapore, where any public performance was subject to a censorship government board called the Infocom Media Development Authority, called IMDA. So any Singaporeans in the house in this Zoom group would be very familiar with this IMDA body. So what the IMDA does is that any details of any and all public performances, talks, protests, and events will have to be submitted to the IMDA at least 20 working days before the start of the event. So you'll have to submit full-length scripts, performance details, venue details, how much your tickets were going to cost, any nitty-gritty detail about your event would have to be submitted. The IMDA will then evaluate the performance and give it a rating ranging from either general, which means that it's content suitable for a general audience, including young children, or advisory, which means that the content contains some mature content for which parental guidance is advised. Advisory 16, which means that it contains content with mature themes and it's more suitable for audiences 16 years and above. Restricted 18, content restricted to audiences 18 years and above. Although for the ratings of general, advisory, and advisory 16, anyone can still watch the performance. It's just that you would have to advise these audiences. It does impact theatre companies greatly because we are more inclined to produce performances that are deemed as safe, as productions that receive rating other than general don't generally get funding support. Schools can't get funding to bring their students to watch, or principals generally won't approve of students watching these shows. So oftentimes for our company, we've had emails from teachers asking what our rating was way in advance of them buying the tickets, because if, let's say, the show was rated a certain rating, it would be hard for them to get funding to bring the students to watch our performances. So you would imagine how such a restriction would shape the arts education and experiences of young people and young artists in Singapore. And also, however, when it comes to online digital content, the IMDA only practices a light touch class license scheme. And this is an automatic license scheme that requires internet service providers and content providers, meaning anyone who would produce or put content up online in Singapore, to comply with an internet code of practice. Secondly, the industry self-regulation is encouraged. So they encourage you to self-regulate your content that you're going to put online. And thirdly, they encourage to have an active public education program to promote parental supervision over your child's access to the internet. So there isn't a specific rating for online content. It's very self-regulated for anything online that you put on the internet for Singapore. So when Clara approached me about this project, I immediately thought, yes, I wanted to be part of it because I wanted our young artists in Singapore to have a platform where they can explore their artistic voices and in turn also their political voice for social change, because as we know, arts and politics go hand in hand. So this is very especially important to me and Singaporean young artists that I work with, because experiences like this are none, where young artists are given the agency to shape the art that they do and present it online. I think there was a similar act in the UK in 1968 that Clara can share more about.
Thank you, Kai. Yeah, and up until 1968, the UK had quite strict censorship laws, and it was abolished after 200 years. And since then, we don't have the same regulations for theatre, which causes a lot of freedom, which I suppose provides a lot of freedoms for people, but also there's a lot of challenges with that in terms of trigger warnings for people, people being aware of what's happening within the performance before they come in, thinking about aftercare for individuals, of things that could be triggering, and just having that wraparound information for that performance. Before we actually go into the project of why this is relevant, I don't know if it's worth hearing a little bit from Shadi here about, as a Singapore young person, why this was of interest to you to sort of participate in this project.
Yeah, as a art student or a theatre student in Singapore, talking about censorship in Singapore has always been a big part of my education here, and a big part of the education of my peers as well. We always hear about the history of censorship and how it affects artists. And growing up with arts education, that you sort of form this sort of antagonistic like character that is the censor. But I think as I went along in my education, we sort of started to see this censor as sort of as a partner that as someone that will always be there, someone that you sort of create discussion with, and it's sort of a mediator rather than this antagonistic character. We're starting to learn that censorship is a creative act, that it is not purely top down, and while we are creating art, we also have to create art with our senses, and it's such a weird thing to be or to exist in as a student artist, and that's why part of learning how to be an artist here in Singapore, at least for me, was how do we negotiate censorship and how do we negotiate self-censorship, especially when funding is on the line. And this has always been part of our education, or my education here in Singapore as a student artist. Yeah.
So our call to action project was very much looking at I suppose the notion of censorship online and working with young people through the lens of social justice, so our young participants can listen to each other from different cultural backgrounds and come to understand how different racial, I suppose economic, social backgrounds can inform the art that they make and actually what they want to say about the world. And it became a real cultural offering of people working together. So how the Living newspaper worked is it works in the format of a traditional newspaper, that you have economic sections, you have news sections, you have gossip sections, and you use this as the frame to talk about the issues that are sort of running in parallel with that. But you do it from a place of parody. So it's always looking at finding ways, engaging ways certainly, to tell these stories. And for young people, that became really important to look at their lived experience and the things that were similar and different between our two countries. In a second, Kai's going to talk you through that. But what I'd like to show you is how this worked for us in action. We had a three-pronged approach. Incredibly important that we can listen to our young people, we can learn from our young people, and we can engage and collaborate with our young people, and then do that internationally. We have the rule of I learn from you, you learn from me, and we learn from each other. And again, it's about creating opportunities for social engagement, addressing political injustice, and finding ways to negotiate how do you do art making on a digital platform when people are not in the same room. And that's where we created 2 online editions. And in a second, we'll show you what some of that looks like. And our main purpose for this was to mobilise the voices of young people globally through working together weekly on a Friday morning for us in Scotland and afternoon for people in Singapore. And we did that initially through a platform called Gather Time, which looks like an old-fashioned almost Nintendo game from the 80s, which was fun. But actually, we found if we just listened to the young people in the first place by engaging in things like Discord or WhatsApp, it was a more accessible format. So when we worked with this, we worked through this as an example. Our young people met online on a Friday. We had conversations. We did workshops together. We made props. We storyboarded our ideas. And throughout the week, our young people met online at times that were appropriate to them. So it wasn't always people meeting early in the morning or last night at night, to look at the social issues that were really important to them. And what became really evident for our young people more than anything is looking at things connected to the LGBTQI+ community and the social injustices that both sets of individuals experiences by telling each other stories, looking at the positive stories about sanitary products in the UK compared to Singapore, looking at adoption and marriage of the LGBTQI+ community, and looking at human rights and the different laws that surrounded that. And together we made our online platform and our 2 editions of the cultural newspaper. And Catherine Starr is going to tell you a little bit more about how that worked for us.
Yeah, definitely. So the special thing about Call to Action is definitely its international discourse. And these were the founding pillars that we used. So we thought about the fact of, was it universal? Was it relatable? Was it engaging? What type of political was it? Was it personal, global, or governmental? Was it safe for everyone involved? Because when you're working with people from different backgrounds, we have to take into consideration, obviously, different levels of comfort, different cultures, political beliefs, religions, and boundaries. We're all different people, and it was very important to all of us that we took that into consideration with engaging in the world. My personal experience with Call to Action was definitely one of the reasons I'm here today. It was so life-changing and career-changing, really. It gave me different experiences from different people, and I got to learn about my privilege and how I want to help others. And it was very different doing it during COVID as well, because as Clara mentioned, we were all constantly either social distancing or we were talking through platforms. So while you're having to miss that connection of being face to face and seeing someone's face, we all got to connect differently through all of us wanting to make a difference and all of us wanting to be there for one another. And it was a really, really good experience. And I think Call to Action 3 is going to bring some really, really great things.
For us, it was really important that we were able to address a number of the United Nations sustainability goals within that, by looking at good health and well-being, by looking at the age gap of individuals that worked in this project and how we can use that as a peer mentorship, a peer mentor, to look at gender equality issues within this. We looked at the gender equality and empowerment for all women and all girls within the work that we did. We tried to reduce inequality within and amongst other countries by using this as a soft protest opportunity. And then the last one is to look at sustainable consumption and production patterns, and how we did this is through this notion of DIY work. Everything was recycled, so we could have a similar aesthetic between both countries that was really cost effective by using recycled cardboard. So what we would like you to do is celebrate our similarities and explore our differences. And it started by writing a list of a suck it list, all the things that really suck in the world. And they could be micro things to global things. So one of my micro things is the fact that my husband always leaves his socks on the floor, and it really infuriates me. Slow walkers on a Sunday really infuriate me. People spitting infuriates me. Prejudice infuriates me. Discrimination, homophobia, transphobia, all these things infuriate me. So what we would do is we would ask our young people to write down all the list a list of all the things that really sucked, and they would literally stand on their soapbox and shout it out. And all the things that we agreed with, because again, it's about celebrating and acknowledging and respecting our differences, like they do in the British Parliament, is we wave bits of paper and whoop and cheer. And we'd like to invite you actually to be part of that today. So I'd like to give you 5 minutes to write a list of all the things that suck for you. And if you feel comfortable, we're going to invite a couple of people to share these things today, so we can build our own little community while we're online today. So what are the things that suck? They could be tiny, they could be personal, they could be hugely political. Again, it's what's relevant for you. We acknowledge and respect our differences, and we'll celebrate our similarities. The purpose of this is to celebrate our differences and start to acknowledge our similarities. And we're going to look for volunteers, for people today who feel quite happy and confident to share their list today. And if people say anything that we celebrate and that we agree with, you can either put some emojis into the chat function, or you can get that sheet of paper and you can whoop and cheer in your own space. just to celebrate these things together. So to start us off, do we have any volunteers?
I could go first if you like.
Amazing, Catherine.
I'll start
Thank
us
you.
off. So my suck it list is loud eating, nails on chalk, fork scraping on a plate, period poverty, abortion bans, LGBTQI plus rights, mental health and well-being justice.
Thank you very much for that. So many things that resonated with me. Who's next? Kathy, go ahead. Come on the mic.
Hi. Gender bias, especially in workplaces, litter, homelessness. I see it a lot here. Gender expectations, especially when you're a woman. Art considered as a side subject, as an optional subject. Expensive water and single-use bottles, and the lack of water fountains. People who disrespect others, judgmental people, my home government, the gross misuse of our public funds back home, name calling, and homophobia, especially judgment based on your gender preferences.
Here, Kathy. Thank you. Who's next? Do you have any volunteers? Sadi, are you ready to go?
Yeah, I could go first. I could go next. Yeah. Wet socks. Drivers that ignore zebra crossings. Loud people on public transport. Nasty anonymous comments online. Islamophobia. Government inaction for climate change. Human trafficking in Southeast Asia. Death penalty, treatment of foreign low-wage workers. That's my list.
So many rich topics that already you can start to see as a community, things that are very different within one another's communities that become beautiful openings for us to talk about. For example, in the UK, we do not have the death penalty. That became something that became quite a big topic for us to talk about, and actually became one of the focal points of one of the videos that we'll talk about in a little while. Do you have anybody else who'd like to share their list today, their suck it list of things that really annoy them? Go for it, Ashlyn.
Okay, loud chewing, unnecessary aggression, too many emails, resistance to change, being homophobic because that's how it was in my day, misogyny, the UK government, Rishi Sunak boasting about being rich, and road rage in the mornings.
So many smiles as we're watching everybody here about the agreement of things that frustrate us. And again, brilliant, really easy ways to go in to talk about people's politics in a really soft manner about loud chewing and how that really aggravates us and makes us tick a little bit, to the wealth divide in different countries and how it's important to talk about that. And then by not looking at the political aspects of the work that we're doing, starting to look at actually from an artistic perspective, how do we artistically start to tell these stories? Because that's the key, isn't it? It's not just about having a talking shop. It's how do we create art that politically has something to say, that is valuable to the lived experience of the young people that we're working with, but also is just not navel gazing. It's about putting something out to the world that other people can explore with them. I'm going to hand you over now to Kai.
At the start, for the first and second edition, I was working with a really great practitioner in Singapore called Rizman Putra. So Rizman is a really great movement and visual artist in Singapore, and we collaborated together to lead, or rather to guide the young artists in Singapore to have these workshop sessions with Clara and her young people in Scotland. So how the first and second edition looked like was that it happened between October to December, and each edition took about 5 weeks. The first week, we held activities like the soapbox, icebreaker activities, just to get the two groups to know each other. And it was all conducted on Zoom. So we would literally, as a group, be huddled over one laptop screen, one camera screen, projected on a screen, and would see Clara and her young people, and we would holler at each other, clap and cheer with each other. It was really great. The atmosphere was really amazing. And I think one of the criticisms about conducting Zoom workshops is that there's no transference of energy, but with the young people, you could really feel their energies, even though it was over the screen. So it was a really great first workshop. So our first workshop was just dedicated to ice-breaking activities, getting to know each other. At the end of the first workshop, we then gave them each a homework to bring or to look at newspaper articles that had social issues that resonated with their own social agency for change. So like Catherine Starr shared earlier, it could be personally political, governmentally political, it could be anything really that they wanted to talk about. And so for the second workshop session, we asked them to bring these newspaper articles, and then we broke them up into groups, and they shared the newspaper articles with each other. Then on top of them sharing these newspaper articles, we also asked them to list down newspaper formats. So it could be things that you see in a newspaper. For example, you would see entertainment section, the sports section, a news weather report, or anything you see in a job application, things that you would see in a newspaper. And then we ask them to pair them up together. So for example, they could be talking about road rage in a sports commentator format, for example, or they could be talking about gender issues in a gossip column format. So we just asked them to pair it up together. And for the second workshop, their task was to create a teaser video about how you would present your social change paired with the newspaper format that they've chosen. And that was just an activity just to get them into the groove of making a video. So they created this in pairs. And so at the end of the second workshop session, they shared these videos with one another. So then they could start talking about social change and social issues that mattered to them. For the third workshop session, we then broke them up into groups, and within those groups, they started discussing about social issues that resonated as a group. So within the group, they had to choose one social issue that they wanted to talk about, and then they also could choose another newspaper format to pair it up together, because we are borrowing the idea of the living newspaper. So at the end of the third workshop session, they were then tasked to meet each other at their own time, again within appropriate timings that was convenient to both groups from Singapore and Scotland. And then during those individual group sessions, they would storyboard their video ideas, come up with props, costume, and set ideas. And my role, and Clara and Rizman's role, was just to guide them, facilitate them, and to ensure their safe space, because if they were going to present these ideas online, they would be very vulnerable. So we just wanted to ensure that they wouldn't be open to any sort of criticism or feedback or backlash from the online community. So from the third session to the fourth session, for the fourth session was then used to create this prop set and costume ideas, and also to record the video ideas. And then at the end of the fourth session, they would then edit the videos together. And so for the fifth session, we always make it into a graduation ceremony where they would share the videos with one another. And we also created call to action certificates that we would hand to them and give in a graduation ceremony that we created as well. Yeah, and they will also share the feedback with one another about what they enjoyed, what they wanted to work on for the second edition. So for the second edition, I worked with the same group of young artists from Singapore. Clara had a new group, and so it's still the same group. But the difference was that for the first edition, they worked with each other. So in a group, there would be maybe 2 to 3 Singaporean young artists together with 2 to 3 Scotland young artists. But for the second edition, we decided to keep each other in their own home country groups. But the cultural exchange then happened in terms of the news articles that they shared. So meaning, for example, the Singaporean youth artists would choose or would pick out newspaper articles that resonated with them, they would hand over these newspaper articles to the Scotland group. The Scotland group would do the same and hand over to the Singaporean artists, and each group would then do their videos based on the exchanged newspaper articles. So this resulted in a really interesting and heartwarming cultural exchange of information and also news across the world. And what it resulted in was, to give you context, one of the groups shared about, from the Singaporean team, shared with the Scotland team about housing issue in Singapore, where the LGBTQ plus community aren't allowed to buy houses in Singapore. So it's a really big issue for these young artists in Singapore, because a lot of them identify, or a lot of them have partners and unable to buy houses with their partners. And so this resulted in a video made by the Scotland group presenting about the issue of housing issue in Singapore. I'm just going to share with you the video that was created by them.
I'm Jel.
And I'm Bill.
And what are we doing today?
Well, we're looking to buy a house. We've been searching for a while now, and we're really hoping this is the one.
Hi! Thanks for coming in for us.
I'm Patrick.
And I'm Simon.
Yeah, welcome to our home. Come on in.
We're newly went and we're wanting to upgrade our space, so yeah, have a look at this one we're trying to sell. So if we begin this tour in the kitchen, in fact, this is one of the key reasons why we bought this in the first place, because of how spacious it was. But yeah, have a nice look inside. It's beautiful. We have so much storage space. It's amazing.
As you may see, we have the TV and the couches.
Yeah, so we're looking for a fresh start. We want to just leave all the furniture behind, so we can buy new ones for our new house that we're going to get, aren't we?
Yeah, who do you know?
Honey, look! They got it!
Oh my goodness! Could this house get any better?
This flat is being sold under the Prime Location Housing Scheme, which is located in a prime location and is affordable, accessible and inclusive for all Kesametians.
Wow! What a nice desk! Mahogany? So polished.
I absolutely adore them. They're definitely one of the better ones that we've had so far viewing the house.
Yeah, they're lovely. I can't wait to meet the rest of them.
We really love this property.
So beautiful. The oven, the kitchen.
The study, incredible. It may be a bit soon, but I think we're gonna buy it.
Are you serious?
Well, we've thought about it, and if you'll have us, we're gonna buy the house.
Oh my god, brilliant! Well, here's the contract.
Thank you. Okay, contract. Just sign it at the bottom, yeah?
Yeah. Wait. You know, if we wait for your partners.
Partners?
We're
a couple.
together, yeah.
I'm really sorry, but under Kesametian law, we're not legally allowed to let you purchase this flat as a heterosexual couple. That is against section 774A of the Kesametian law. Therefore, I apologise, but we cannot sell you this flat.
No. Yeah, according to this contract, singles can jointly buy a resale flat and hold equal shares, but you're not.
We're gonna have to ask you to evict the premises. This isn't fair!
Let's go.
Really loved that video, and I thought it was so smart how they flipped the narrative, and truly everything in the video was really their effort. Like, we didn't have a hand in it. And I think one of the important things that was in the video was that it was there was a newspaper, and it's called Kesamet Times. So one of the things that arose from our workshop sessions was they were very concerned about naming the country specifically, because they didn't want to get the other group into trouble, or they didn't want to they wanted to ensure each other's safe space. So during the workshops, they decided that they wouldn't name any country specifically, and so they came up with a fictional title or fictional name for their own country, and they came up with Kesamet for Singapore, because it was a flip on Temasek, which was what our country was once known as last time. Yeah. So that was the first and second edition. Now I'm going to hand it over to Shadi, who's going to talk a bit about our third edition that's happening really soon.
Yes, the third edition. Yeah, so I am new to Call to Action. I'm very excited to be part of Call to Action. And I think the most appealing part of Call to Action this time around is that because the pandemic has sort of eased up a bit, we are able to travel, and so the Singaporean group will be traveling to Scotland at the end of around the end of November. Woo, and I'm very excited for that. Yeah, but other than because of the fact that we are traveling, part of the appeal of Call to Action for me has sort of shifted. Because with the pandemic and the past 3 years, we've sort of realized that we are more connected than we actually acknowledged before the pandemic, and that during the pandemic, while we were all cooped up in our own homes during our like lockdowns or whatever, the virtual space, so like social media and everything became this sort of like platform or place of protest, and that obviously manifested itself in the first and second edition of Call to Action, where they actually put up videos online, and that's where they hosted most of their works. So while the first and second edition was about that, about sharing, when I'm looking at Call to Action, the third edition of Call to Action, it is really about action. It's about taking us as individual artists and sort of forming a community. There's a saying where it takes only a single person to start a movement, and I believe that it takes a community to keep it going. So by being able to actually cross borders, physically crossing borders and meeting them in person, Call to Action, the third edition will help us create that community. And I guess the best place to start building a community is from two seemingly different groups of people coming together and finding similarities and finding a shared vision. So I think with that, the main strength of Call to Action is actually community and pushing ourselves as like student artists from a local perspective to a global perspective. And that global perspective is how, in the way we think, in the way we make art, and the way we share art. So I'm really looking forward to the third edition of Call to Action, where I get to be in Scotland. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shadi. I think what you're saying is really important about this, looking at what happens locally, and how that can apply to us globally. And now this is our call to action to you all. Kai and I are looking to create a fourth edition after the third edition. And actually, it's really poignant that Eric's in the room, because our fourth edition is a result. Hang on, just got to share my screen here. What can we do to activate ITAC to become effective in our field? And ask the question, what is standing in our way? Is it hierarchies in and around teaching artistries? Is it silos? Is it our own emotions, vulnerabilities, insecurities, angers, fears, injustices? Is it feelings of unworthiness? Is it community-based trauma? Is it injustice? Is it our own visibilities that we're not sitting at the table, that people don't really know who we are and what we do? So our plea is, we would like to, as part of our innovator application, look to create a call to action fourth edition, a teacher's edition, whereby we go through the entire programme of teaching you our call to action approach, if you like, but through the lens of being a teaching artist. So our videos are a political response to what it is to be a teaching artist globally and in our own communities. And the way that we'd like to frame that is we're going to work with youth mentors across all three editions to be the adult mentors. And the primary fact for that is, again, we're trying to disrupt this notion of hegemonic structures that exist with adult leaders being the adult expert. And actually, the young people will be the more knowledgeable people in the room, and you'll be assigned a young mentor where we'll all be online together, but just in different Zoom rooms, and we'll teach you the actual programme. And the hope is, at the end of it, that we'll create our own 4th edition, digital edition of Call to Action. It'll take place over 5 different weeks, and we'll go through the programme as Kai explained. The first week is about building our own communities of being a teaching artist group for 90 minutes. We'll then introduce our approach to Call to Action. Then you'll be assigned a youth mentor. You'll then go away and think about what is something that's pressing for you being a teaching artist in relation to what can we do to activate the field and what is the thing that's standing in our way. We'll come back together and then we'll start to work in our small groups to create our own digital edition in reference to the programme of the Living Newspaper. And again, adopting, I suppose, a format of a specific part of a newspaper. And then at the end of it, our hope is that the innovation that comes out of that is there'll be a live edition of a call to action that is absolutely advocating for teaching artistry, not only in our own local communities, but what it means globally. It's something that ITAC can use as a resource to sort of share culturally different people's experiences in one edition, and we will give a pack of how to use the call to action with your own groups and your own communities. The hope is that we'll start this in January, and it will run for 5 different sessions between January and the middle of March, with the view that it will go live hopefully at the end of March. And again, like we did with our young people, there will be a graduating ceremony where everybody will receive a certificate of being a call to action graduate, and what we've done together to create hopefully a more established and connected field by talking about the things that are standing in our way. If that is something you're interested in, Madeline is going to share in our chat box a Google form for you to register your interest. We'll be taking names up until the very first week in November, which gives Kai and I a week to get back in contact with you all to find out what level you'd like your involvement to be, and we'll use that to piece together our innovator application. So in the meantime, we'd like to open the floor to you all today to ask either Kai or myself or any of our incredible youth artists any questions about our projects, our editions, or our processes.
Well, congratulations, and know how beautiful and thrilling it is to learn about this work. And my question for the young people flashes back to my own angry years as a young artist. That I noticed the difference between the energy evoked by being against something and the energy that arises of being for something. And I wondered how that balance worked for you. I found when I was young, being against something like the Vietnam War brought people together in big numbers with big rage, and that being for things was a little harder to draw people together because there were so many things they wanted in life. So I wondered if we could hear a little bit from the young people about this, if they sense a difference in that energy or motivation.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this question first. I think from call to action, whether we were talking about positive, something we were for, or something that we disagreed with, there was a natural sense of energy that we all wanted to get to the same conclusion. So there was a strong energy of confidence, there was a strong energy of dedication, and that took over both emotions. And it became just powerful in all ways. I think it was so intriguing to have us all come together as a community to talk about the things that we were for, that we were against. And because of the specifics of call to action, like you said, sometimes it's harder to find people who are for the same things as you, because people are for a lot of things. But because you're constantly talking about things from different aspects of the world, when there were things you were for, there were people who were for that as well that wanted to talk about it and talk about the positivities that come from it. So I think there was definitely similar energies to both things, which I found different.
That felt really important actually, because one of the things that was quite evident is the things that were happening in Scotland, our Singaporean young people used that as a positive call. Mm-hmm. So for the fact that in Scotland we have free period products for individuals who menstruate, that doesn't happen in Singapore. So our positive for was their negative against, and they can use that in a way to talk about other countries that are things that are moving them forward in a way to talk about it that was non-threatening to the country.
We celebrated each other and celebrated the way that we're all working together to get this equality across all countries. So we were all kind of constantly celebrating together in a way, and it was a very beautiful experience.
Shadid, would you like to answer that question?
I think Catherine Starr put it quite beautifully as to what I am expecting as well with call to action. And I think there's always a constant negotiation when you're making socially engaged art. And I think there's a wonderful distinction that I've never actually thought about myself, that the distinction of energies within against and for. I've always felt like if I'm angry at something, it's always the same kind of anger. But actually now, like thinking back, there is two different kind of energies that we're always negotiating, and especially as artists, and how that shows up in our art. And I think I'm excited to see how call to action actually makes us more aware or makes us clear with those distinctions, especially when we are collaborating with people from a different country, a different culture, and how we see the same thing differently. And I'm excited to see that distinction in our work as well. Yeah.
Thanks to you all.
If you have a question in our chat, so if you just bear with me, I'm just going to read it just now. I'd be curious if any of the groups that were formed faced significant challenges, either topical challenges or personal clashes with their formed group, or other things that didn't allow the project to go as well as planned. And most importantly, how did you work through those challenges, or how could you avoid those challenges in the future or the next time round? Did you find there was any challenges?
My group didn't personally face any challenges, but I think that's because in the beginning we all spoke and set boundaries. So if there's things that people weren't comfortable talking about because of a clash or because it was something they weren't willing to express themselves, we expressed that straight away so that we were having a positive and a fast-paced discussion of the things we wanted to focus on. Obviously, I can't speak for all groups, and I think there was occasionally a problem where something was mentioned that irritated the other, and then it was just a case of taking a breath, taking a step back, and realizing that we're not always all going to agree, but that's okay. And the thing that we were there to do was to focus on the positives and was to focus on making these changes together.
And I think just to sort of reiterate that, that's why Kai and I put together these founding pillars about how universal is it, how political is it personally political, is it governmentally political, is it globally political, and most importantly, how safe is it for our young people to have these discussions from a country's perspective? And how do we keep our young people safe, because some topics in either country could lead our young people into really turbulent waters, despite the fact that the digital landscape is safe. It's safer, it's not entirely safe. Kai, I don't know if you want to sort of expand on that at all.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the first session, we set boundaries or we guided them to set boundaries for each other. So then it really helped their discussion in the following weeks. There weren't any particularly topical challenges or personality clashes. They were really sweet and kind to each other. And I think it's because they had that conversation in the first week about setting boundaries for each other. Although I know there were logistical issues. I know the time difference the time difference was a bit hard for us to calculate at times. So I know there was one Singaporean youth artist who was supposed to meet with his Scotland mates, and he calculated the time wrongly. So he thought he was meeting them at 1 a.m., which was fine for him because that's the time he usually works on things. But then when he recalculated, it was actually 3 a.m. So his Scotland mates were like, hey, it's 3 a.m. Are you sure it's not too early for you? It's not too late for you? And he was already on the call. And he was like, no, it's okay. I always sleep this late. But he was just too embarrassed to tell them that he calculated it wrongly. But he was really sweet about it. And he was like, it's totally my fault. So, and I committed to meeting with them. So I'll just continue with the meeting. But no personality or topical challenges, but just little things like this that made it really funny for them also.
Another person we've got from Beth is, do you find that young people actually encounter newspapers in their daily lives, or is that an unknown medium? Over to you both. Is that unknown?
You go ahead first. No, you go first.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think it's completely unknown. Maybe like physical newspaper to me it's some. I don't think I've touched a physical newspaper since 5-6 years ago. But I think we do consume a lot of news and content either through traditional media outlets like newspaper who do have websites or who publish articles. But sometimes, and most of the time, we were linked to it through social media, so like Twitter, Instagram. Usually, we don't. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I don't look at like newspaper websites, but I do go to them through like commentary that's going on Twitter, on Instagram, and whatever social media websites that we're using. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think because we have the availability to look at news outlets through social media, people don't pick up a paper as much. But I think it's sometimes important to also pick up a paper, and it's a difference between having a book in your hand and having a Kindle in your hand. Sometimes it's nice to have the physicality there. But I completely agree. I also get all of my news through social media and through news outlets. And I think that's just down to the point of we're used to that's how we get our media. So it's not in our set to go and pick up a newspaper to find out the things we need to.
And there's something about the immediacy of news online, isn't there? And the way that theatre represents that as well, compared to making a movie. You can make something really instantaneously.
And you can check different sources as well. So you read one article and then you'll find that article has 4 different sources. So you can always be fact checking and find out much more than you could from, say, I'd say 1 page of an article.
Stop the press. Any other questions do we have this morning, either about the projects or our ambitions for moving forward?
Yeah, I have a question.
Hi,
I'm
David.
wondering, I'm wondering how important it was for you guys to come to consensus with, or to agree between everyone, between the group, about the perspective of the news articles before it was shared with the other group. Was it important that coming to consensus as a group before sharing that? Thanks.
That's a great question. For us, it was certainly about the international exchange of people understanding each other's cultures. And again, because we'd had these 4 pillars that really safeguarded how we're going to navigate our relationship in this, it was just really eye-opening. For me, certainly, about the censorship laws that existed in Singapore and even what was available from a news outlet perspective. So certainly for our young people from Singapore, it gave them the great opportunity to talk about issues that they wouldn't normally be able to talk about from a theatrical perspective in terms of LGBTQAI+, and certainly the death penalty. And the moment I can only speak from a Scottish perspective here, that there was a huge wave of empathy and compassion that was completely unique to anything I've ever experienced before, and that desire to want to make sure that the story that they were told, they did their due diligence in terms of research to make sure the story that they were creating was based on fact and not just what was in the newspaper. And I think that's what Catherine, sorry, you were talking about, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Further research.
With our group, when we chose our newspaper article, we sent it back to our friends in Singapore to be like, can you tell us this is factual? Is there anything in this article that has been added for the sake of news? We constantly wanted to make sure what we were saying was factual, it was right and was helpful to them, and not just us speaking from a place of privilege and reading an article and going, well, I want to say this, this and that. We were making sure that it resonated with the people in Singapore. 100%.
That was hugely important about understanding our own cultural bias and our unconscious bias, especially being a predominantly white middle-class group of young people, is how to address that with sensitivity. Kai, can you speak a little bit more about what it's like for you young people?
Yeah, they constantly consulted each other. They even made presentations for each other to present on the newspaper article that was shared with them, so that they wanted to present the news as factually correct as possible. Because, like Catherine Starr said, they didn't want to present things that were their own opinions. They sort of became each other's mentors in that sense, which was what we wanted to do for the fourth edition. And so they naturally just fell into the role for each other, which was quite really nice to see. It wasn't something that we told them to do, but they already set that boundaries for themselves. They wanted to present each other's stories as authentic as possible, which is really great to see come out of that cultural exchange.
Great question, David. So important. Thank you.
And thank you for the lovely message as well that's just been put in chat.
Well, if there are no more questions today, please, if you do have any questions in the meantime, feel free to sort of access the Google Doc that Madeline shared in the chat if you're interested, or if you just want to know more about the project. Kai and I will certainly get back to you on that. But can I just thank you all very much for giving up your morning to spend it with us, and especially to our young artists for sharing. It's so important that all voices are heard in this space and not just Kai and I.